thanks for bearing with us. We're running a few minutes behind schedule. My fault, apologies. My job today is to interview Alex White, the gentleman sat beside me here. I'll do a quick introduction, and after that, Alex is going to give us a presentation on some of the stuff that they've been working on at Next Big Sound for a few minutes. Then we're going to sit back down and have a little bit of a talk, and hopefully you guys, if you have any questions, please save them until the end. We would love to answer any questions if you guys have. Also, Alex is going to be around today as well, so it's a good time to catch up with a great guy. Let me tell you a little bit about Next Big Sound. They launched in 2009, and they're the leading provider of online analytics, tracking hundreds of thousands of artists around the world. Next Big Sound is now part of Pandora, and they deliver analytics tools that are used by music makers, labels, artists, and their fans. Alex is one of the most respected young executives in the music and tech world. He's been named by Forbes magazine as the top 30 under 30 3 times. He's also been named by Billboard as one of the top 30 people in the music business under 30. And he's a good friend of mine, and I'd like you to welcome to Bilbao today. Alex, lovely, thanks for having us here.
Great to be here.
I guess you have some stats and some analytics that you wanted to show the guys. We might be a nice way to open up our presentation.
Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Excited to talk to you about data and analytics in the music industry and some of the recent research that we've been doing in the past year or so. And this will just be 5 or so minutes. This is a lot of this is available online, and I'll have a link at the end as well. So just to orient everyone, in the first 6 months of this year, we tracked over 1 trillion plays across all the different services that we tracked. 1 trillion with a T. This is every play on YouTube and Vivo and SoundCloud and Spotify and Pandora. Spins included for the first time post-acquisition. And 13.9 billion new fans added. This is every follower for artists across Twitter, Facebook, subscriber on YouTube, Vine, Instagram, etc. Just a tremendous amount of activity, and a lot of this is tagged with geographic or demographic information on the fans and consumption. Looking at the various different networks, Instagram is growing tremendously. This is up over 6x year over year in terms of new fans added across all artists on Instagram. SoundCloud, despite the headlines in the press, continues to grow tremendously. Very big platform for music consumption. And Wikipedia, interestingly enough, views to artists' Wikipedia page are down. We think this is because Google has started pulling out some of the Wikipedia entries and putting them right in the search box, reducing the need to kind of click through and see the full Wikipedia entry. And one of the things we look at is across these different genres and these different networks, given the relative popularity of the genres, what do we expect the consumption to look like on these different networks? And I just want to call out Facebook in terms of way over-indexing for Latin artists on the platform. And you'll see in a second as we walk through the top charts for these platforms how clearly that is made. So looking across these different platforms, there's so many different ways people are consuming music, as we all know as music fans and in the industry. In the first 6 months of 2015, the most followed new artist on Twitter was Taylor Swift. And the most followed new artist on Instagram in terms of new followers was Taylor Swift. And the most watched artist on all of Vivo was Taylor Swift. So we can watch any video, and yet most of us are continuing to watch and follow Taylor Swift. Spotify, of course, she's not on, so Calvin Harris is in the #1 spot in the first 6 months of 2015. On Pandora, Drake is the most played and listened to artist in the first 6 months of this year. On RDO, it's also Drake. And on Facebook, it's Nicky Jam. And if you aren't big into Latin music, you might not recognize this name, which is crazy alongside all of the Drake and Taylor Swifts and other kind of global superstars. And this goes back to, on Facebook, Latin music way over-indexing in terms of consumption based on what we would expect. And a little bit about Nicky Jam, if you aren't familiar with his music. And just going on the Latin theme, since I think it would be interesting for this audience, Romeo Santos, I had never heard of before he sold out 2 days in Yankee Stadium back-to-back in New York. And just the incredible amount of online activity and consumption and fan base and audience that some of these Latin artists have built is astounding. The last piece here I'll talk through is 5 different stages for artists. And so in the past, there was a fairly well understood route from gold record, platinum record, and what each of those meant along the way, and how to develop an artist from, just very beginning in the first EP or the first record all the way through global superstardom. We want to help in the modern era. What are some sort of benchmarks along the way that people can use to orient themselves around where they are in the life stage of the artist? And how do you think about moving systematically from one stage to the next? So we looked at every artist online and we bucketed them into 5 different levels: undiscovered, promising, established, mainstream, and epic. And I'm going to walk through each of these 5 and just give you a general understanding of the various benchmarks here. And starting to think about the artists you work with and what works for an epic artist is certainly maybe not available or not going to work for an undiscovered artist, and vice versa. So at the very beginning, 0 to 2,000 Facebook page likes, 0 to 5,000 Twitter followers, under 1 million YouTube video views. Artists are just getting started. And actually, the vast majority of artists online, roughly 80–90% of artists, are in this undiscovered category. And that was something that was surprising to us. We expected the kind of very healthy, vibrant, long tail when we started Next Big Sound in 2009, but just the skewed distribution of artists where most have 0 and 1 new plays per day, compared to some of the bigger acts which continue to rack up astronomical numbers. In the promising stage, you're moving again to 20 to 200,000 Facebook page likes, 5 to 80,000 Twitter followers, over 1 million plays on YouTube. And watch that YouTube number as we move through these different stages and how fast and quickly that rises. So at the established stage, you're between 8 and 39 million YouTube plays, 80 to 300,000 Twitter followers, and 200 to 500,000 Facebook page likes. And one of the things we look at is what's the length of time it takes for artists to move through these different stages and the velocity as they move from one stage to the next. And that can tell you a lot about where they will ultimately end up, is based on that acceleration through these different stages. And one of the ways our customers are using this information is, hey, we have a promising artist that we just signed. How do we get them from the promising stage to established stage? What does that mean in terms of numbers we should look for? How do we track that on a week-to-week basis to make sure that the marketing and promotional activities we're doing are actually moving these numbers along? And what is the kind of growth rate that we should look for in terms of similar artists at this similar stage? At the mainstream level, 40 to 400 million YouTube views, you see these buckets are just kind of continuing to stretch, and that's to encompass the artists at the very high end and how many views they are actually getting on a regular basis. And the final stage is 10 million plus Facebook page likes, 2 million plus Twitter followers, over 400 million views on YouTube or Vivo. And that's really, for the top artists that we walked through those charts, and those are the sort of numbers that they're seeing across these platforms. Now, of course, each of these stages has various revenue numbers associated with them, which I didn't display up there, but that's, of course, where the business part comes in and gets really interesting in terms of what can you expect from an artist at those different levels in terms of recorded revenue, live revenue, and all sorts of streams for these artists and management teams. So that's just a quick kind of 5–10 minute look at some of the recent research that we've been doing. Here we're going to talk more about how to use this information and how we started Next Big Sound to begin with. So thanks.
Thanks, Alex. Very interesting. lots of numbers, lots of figures, lots of data. It can be a daunting subject.
Certainly.
But I thought it might be interesting if you could go back to the start and tell us, how you got into the music business and why you built this. I thought it might be interesting for some of the people to hear your story.
Yeah, so I've been around music my whole life. My dad's a professional cellist. I grew up playing in bands, working at a recording studio in high school. And that's when I wanted to be a rock star until I realized that I didn't like performing my music in front of other people. And that would be a problem, career-wise, if I was going to be a rock star. So then I wanted to sign the bands. If I couldn't be the rock star, I wanted to sign the rock stars and be the executive in the corner office with the gold records and the signed guitars on the wall. And that's when I started switching into the business side of the music industry. I interned at Universal Records in New York and Chicago. I booked bands at Northwestern, where I went to college in Chicago. We had $330,000 a year to book bands to come through. And if we didn't sell out those shows, we would get our funding cut. And so I wanted to use the tools that booking agents and the real people in the music industry were using to understand which artists they should work with and book, and which ones were resonating with the audience that they were trying to sell tickets to. And so I got access to Polestar and some of the other tools that are being used, and I was like, this can't possibly be the only tools that exist for billions of dollars in the music industry to book and route tours. There's got to be something better, and the more we looked, the more we understood that a lot of the new ways people were consuming music wasn't being translated into useful information for artists, managers, labels, publishers, promoters, and that was kind of the beginning of us starting to realize that the SoundScan data that we were tracking as an industry, the weekly CD sales, was not enough in terms of the changing ways that music was being consumed and listened to, and all the rich new information that was suddenly available across Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, SoundCloud, Wikipedia, Tumblr, Instagram, Vine, on and on. So that was the kind of early beginnings of Next Big Sound.
Interesting. You also mentioned there that you booked bands at college, and I've met a lot of music executives in the business, and a lot of folks started out booking bands at college that have gone on to do like big things in the business. Tell us a little bit more about that experience of booking bands.
Yeah, so this was 2008, and Facebook had just launched around these regional campuses, and so you could look in the network by what bands people listed in their profiles and segment it by university. So you could say, how many people at Northwestern list Wilco as opposed to My Morning Jacket? And that was what we started doing. Was I had a decision to make, which band should we book, Wilco or My Morning Jacket? And we looked at the numbers, and we started comparing them to the number of tickets that we ultimately sold, because again, we still have this problem today. Just because someone lists Wilco in their profile doesn't mean that they will buy a ticket, or just because they think this band is cool doesn't mean they'll actually go to the show. And so that was what we started doing my year, and Facebook's kind of changed a bunch over time and made it harder and harder to get that same level of information. But that was a really early kind of obvious thing to me, was to use the data that was available to inform these big decisions.
So without that data, what would you have been going on intuition or gut instinct, or what do you think, if you hadn't got those tools back then?
The way that the organization had run, it was the biggest student group on campus. The way they'd run before was just kind of an elite group of 5 or 6 students who would use their own music they were listening to and bring those bands to campus. And they had varying degrees of success. Some would sell out and some would not. And it kind of might have just been the way I approached it, but instead of booking only the bands that I liked, it was, well, what is all my peers and what's the audience actually listening to, and how do we find those artists and bring them to campus?
Interesting.
So different approaches.
If you remember last night, we went to a networking event and we bumped into just randomly a couple of agents and promoters, both of whom use Next Big Sound. We didn't even know them until last night, and they say they get it every day, and they rely on that information to inform the artists that they're going to book and stuff. That must be inspiring for you as a guy who set up this company 6 years ago, and you walk into a bar in Bilbao and two music industry professionals are using your tools and services.
Yeah, it's been a crazy 6 or 7 years for us, and that's the most exciting part, is when the data is actually being used or people recognize the company or the name and say, hey, we get the reports in our inbox every week, or hey, can you add this data source, or why can't we still do X, Y, and Z? And that's how we've built the company so far, is the most engaged people who kind of see the world in the way that I was describing the way I book tours, hungry for this information, and frustrated that it's not more geographically granular, that it's too expensive, that it's this or that, and it's that drive of why can't we use this data to do this, or that makes the products better and ultimately makes better data-driven decisions that are better for artists, better for the music industry at large, I believe. Indeed,
and also like the smart agents can use the data as evidence to go to bookers and promoters. They can give them like facts, instead of hype. We can give them real information about the bands that they're booking.
Totally,
it's exciting. You mentioned in your in your younger days, you worked for Universal Music. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing there, and perhaps your frustrations in working at a major record label, and ultimately the things that you learned there that you were able to build into Next Big Sound. Tell us about how archaic it was.
It was a really glamorous experience there. I was in at 6 a.m. on Wednesday morning stapling SoundScan reports together to have on the executive's desk by 8 a.m. when they got in the morning, and was highlighting the different DMAs, and thought it was really actually interesting and fascinating and cool to see this level of detail. And that's what I think people forget sometimes, is that SoundScan totally changed things, and for once you had an accurate view of consumption in 1991. And the problem wasn't that no one was using data to make decisions, it was that the data wasn't keeping up with the decisions that needed to be made, the speed with which the world was changing, and the consumption. So I knew that executives were looking at this data very religiously to inform decisions. And when we first started Next Big Sound, it was that experience of, hey, if we could get something that would be on as referenced as SoundScan, that would be a very powerful place to be. And so I'll just tell the first story of the first night we collected data. If you can remember, way back to 2009, the biggest music site in the world was MySpace. And we built a tracker to see how many plays, and we just picked an artist at random, Akon. How many plays did Akon have between overnight? And that ran from 2 a.m. till 8 a.m. And he had 500,000 plays in that off hours of the night. And I knew that was an enormous amount of consumption that the music industry wasn't tracking, because it wasn't available through SoundScan or any other data source. And so it was that experience at Universal that kind of colored the early days of knowing even that data was trying to be used, but that it wasn't keeping up. And one of the other experiences I had that summer was calling record stores around in support of a tour to understand and ask the poor clerks there, was anyone asking for the record? Was it playing in the stores? How many had they sold in the last week? So this was kind of very hungry market research. I was filling it into a spreadsheet that would kind of roll up with other spreadsheets and go off to God knows where. But instead of asking a 16-year-old store clerk in Houston, Texas, if anyone had asked about the record when they were just trying to get back to their job, online, instead of asking people and needing to rely on human intuition or human instincts, which are often faulty or hard to get, you can actually see real numbers and intention. And instead of are people asking about the record, you can see on Google or YouTube, are people typing into their browser this artist or this track? And it's a much more accurate reflection of, are people interested in this artist and wanting to learn more?
Interesting. One of the things that we thought we might talk about today was, what analytics and data have been doing over the past 5 years, like in the past, and what can we expect to see in the not too distant future? Are there some things that's interesting and exciting for you, and some of the folks in the room will perhaps be able to apply some of the stuff you're learning, and what do you think lies ahead?
Yeah, so we always talk internally about this data pyramid. So at the bottom foundational level is the raw data feeds coming in. That's number of plays, views, fans, and comments across all these different services. And that's the actual foundation and underpinning for everything else that comes after it. The next level up is information, so turning that raw data into a report that you can look at, or when you type in an artist and linking all those together so you don't have to scroll through 30 different sites, but you can see it all in one place. And ultimately, the top two layers of the pyramid are knowledge and intelligence. So knowledge level is, hey, here's 3 sort of options that you can do. Artists like you have done X, Y, and Z. You might want to consider this. And that intelligence layer is the ultimate pinnacle, which is based on 8 years of historical data and all of the numbers and information that we're crunching. Here's what we believe has worked for bands like you, and here's what you should do. So how do you make it kind of leaping all the way to actionability? And I forget who said it, but someone said that every spreadsheet is one function short of useful. And that's really what we're trying to do. The last 5 years, if those were about gathering the data and being able to have these different services reporting on a geographically granular basis, on a daily, accurate reporting, which many services are still now just figuring out. That's the lowest priority behind making sure the service actually works and serving advertising and raising venture capital. If the last 5 years has been about getting that data and information layers set up, I believe the next 5 is all about the knowledge and intelligence layer. And that's really what we're focused on 100% at Next Big Sound, is how do we take all of this data and make it as useful as possible. And you really need industry context to know what decisions are being made. It's different by profession within the industry. It's different by artist stage of career. And how do we know that you are a manager, and here's the 5 artists that you manage and where they are kind of geographically and what their goals are as artists, because they might all be different. And how do we serve that up rather than having to peck through lots of different reports or analytics tools just in an email of, hey, we know you saw a spike here. That compares to these 5 other artists that also saw spikes based on this event in the last few years. Artists like you have gone on to do X, Y, and Z to get to the next level. Click here to, take action X or Y. So I think it's a really exciting time in that a lot of the plumbing and foundational work has been done, but there's certainly more than enough work to do going forward.
Cool. Over the past couple of years, there's been some interesting acquisitions by streaming services. Spotify bought the music Echo Nest. We had Apple got the guys at Music Metric, and earlier this year in May, Next Big Sound was acquired by Pandora. And if the future of the music business is going to be built on foundations such as streaming and mobile, tell us a little bit about what you hope to apply and learn and do now that you're part of a massive company, Pandora.
Yeah, so I know Pandora's US and Australia and New Zealand, so if you're from Spain, you haven't seen it, it's on demand, or it's not an on-demand service, it's internet radio. And 80 million monthly active users, roughly the biggest one on the planet. And it's been a really exciting year in terms of other data analytics companies in the music industry, all with slightly different takes, but focused on the same opportunity we were, being acquired by these larger streaming players. And it's been fascinating for us. We've always been a step removed from the listener-fan direct interaction. So we might know that there's a lot of activity and talking about this on Facebook, but we don't have the direct access to the Facebook audience, so we can't recommend that the band sends a message to all the fans in this area or that area. And that's always been a huge limitation for us, and I think what's exciting being part of a platform like Pandora is with millions of daily listeners connecting with their favorite artists, and discovering new bands, there's a huge opportunity to take that through to kind of full actionability in the way that, I was describing that top of the pyramid. So artists like you have done X, Y, and Z, click here to do X, but instead of X having to go through different parties, if we're built into Pandora's tools and systems, it makes it all much more seamless and kind of all integrated and easy and finally useful, and taking it all the way through instead of being a step removed.
And I think we're seeing some interesting things that, like the likes of Pandora recently acquired a ticketing company, so you can understand where that's going when a streaming service know a lot about who's listening to what, who's playing what, who's where. Buy a ticket to a show. That's one example. And you have folks like the guys at Spotify. They built the merchandise into the platform as well, so big artists can put merchandise and tickets and offers and opportunities in front of fans at the point of consumption. What are your thoughts about those opportunities?
I think that's the way this is all heading, and it seems crazy when you're, as a listener, that you put your birthday into Facebook. They can see, Facebook knows who you're married to or dating, and their birthday, who their favorite artists are. All the data exists in a lot of these different places, and as a fan, it would be awesome if, let's say, my girlfriend loves Fall Out Boy and her birthday is November 29th and they're coming to New York area on December 10th, and why is it so hard to surface something to me saying, hey, would you like this VIP package where you get driven, picked up at your apartment and driven to the venue, and here's the different tiers, and we think this is perfectly tailored and personalized to you. And what's exciting, I think, about the moves that Spotify's making and Pandora, Pandora's always been about personalized experiences and how to stitch that together, and there's just a ton of opportunity to surface this data in a way that's actually useful for the artists and managers, but ultimately the fan, and that's what's exciting. And it's still very early days for all of this and stitching things together. Pandora just rolled out artist audio messaging, so you can audio drop messages, and just stitching that together with personalization, with everything that's going on in the ticketing and data-driven, a company like Next Big Sound. There's just a lot of raw materials there at the foundational layer, and hopefully, marching up that pyramid towards the top.
Great. I'm conscious of time. Do any of you guys have a question? Any questions at this point? No? No worries. Well, we've got a couple of minutes to finish up. You also mentioned, as well as working with agents and managers and labels, you work with brands a lot. Tell maybe a minute or two about brands, and it's a big part of your business now.
Yeah, so we started working with brands directly about 1.5 years ago. Pepsi was our first brand client. And there's a lot of really amazing agencies like Frucht and Wasserman and Platinum Rye and others who's for decades have been responsible for pairing brands and bands together and executing these live events or partnerships or endorsement or sponsorship deals. And I thought that those companies would be the most offensive about us coming in with data and trying to pair brands and artists based on who's already reacting in a brand's target audience. And so again, this is kind of like the college booking experience was, of course, a brand's not going to greenlight a $50 million band partnership without data. And lo and behold, they were, over and over again. And that was where kind of immediately all the years of historical data we had and expertise we developed around predictions and cross-platform measurement seemed very obvious for application to the brand world. And what was most exciting was these agencies, instead of fighting us and saying, it's so cold and data-driven and, you don't missing all of the human elements of pairing brands and bands, they were actually the biggest champions of this. They said, thank you, we've been spending years trying to defend this artist or that artist to work with the brand, and now we have data to back that up. And so we released a co-marketing paper with Frucht about 1 year ago, called Measuring the Value Exchange Between Brands and Bands, and how do brands know which artists they should work with, and how do bands know which brands are able to actually grow their career. And if done properly, it's hugely beneficial for both sides, and so we started working with American Express and Ford and others, and Pandora obviously has a massive brand business, so we're continuing to build products and do things in that area. And I think that the way that sports is very measurable and approachable for brands, and just billions of dollars are flowing into sports because it is something that brands can wrap their head around, and as traditional media and kind of fragments, it's a huge opportunity. And music has a huge opportunity to funnel some of those brand dollars into music, but music needs to be more measurable and more approachable than to brands. And there's plenty of horror stories of brands coming into music, and the artist pushes the album release, a year because it's not ready, and the brand kind of never touches music again as long as those executives are still there. And to prevent something like that, you would want to do, rather than maybe an artist-only deal, if you're a label, say, hey, we will guarantee X number of reach amongst Latin American fans or Hispanic fans in the United States. And instead of guessing which artists are popular amongst millennials, we can actually tell you across all these sources which artists are already reacting with your target audience.
Cool. Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up. For everyone in the room here that's not used Next Big Sound, can they sign up today? It's free, or? Yeah,
just nextbigsound.com is free if you want to track artists. We have an enterprise product that is for bigger entertainment companies. But would encourage you to sign on and get free weekly email reports, and just starting to get familiar, whether it's through Next Big Sound or any data analytics provider, and with these numbers, tracking them over time. If you aren't measuring it, you can't improve it.
Awesome. Guys, join me in thanking Alex for his wonderful talk today.
Thanks for having me,
Alex.
Stephen.